All right, let's jump right into something that's probably hit your radar if you're following the world of AI, but maybe hasn't been fully unpacked, especially for those of you deep in AI research and ML engineering.
Yeah.
We're looking at a major legal clash. Some of the biggest names in entertainment, like Disney and Universal, taking a leading AI image generator, Midjourney, to court.
That's right. And this isn't just another research paper we're dissecting today. Our source material for this deep dive is a pretty significant court complaint filed by Disney and Universal against Midjourney. And we've also got the cease and desist letters that came before it. It's really a window in how major content owners are challenging the core practices of training and deploying these generative AI models.
And what that can mean for the technical decisions you make when building these systems.
Exactly.
It's a potentially pivotal legal battle.
Yeah.
Our mission here is to go through this complaint, try to understand the core arguments Disney and Universal are making, look at the specific claims they're filing, and really figure out what this legal action reveals about the whole copyright debate in the age of generative AI. We want to look at it specifically through the technical lens. What does this complaint allege about how models like Midjourney are built, what they produce, and what responsibilities the developers have, at least according to the plaintiffs?
Okay, yeah, let's set the stage then. The players involved. On the plaintiff side, you've got some incredibly well-known names. Disney Enterprises, Marvel characters, Lucasfilm, 20th Century Fox, they're all kind of grouped together as Disney in the complaint.
Right, heavy hitters.
Definitely. And alongside them are Universal City Studios and DreamWorks Animation, referred to collectively as Universal.
These are companies with, deep histories, built over decades, even a century for Universal. Their whole business model relies heavily on creating, owning, licensing these huge libraries of copyrighted stuff.
Iconic stuff.
Totally iconic characters, woven into popular culture globally.
And facing them is Midjourney, Inc., the company behind that very popular AI image service. You give it text prompts, it gives you images. Millions of users doing this every day.
Okay, so what's the main legal hook here? What are the plaintiffs actually claiming in this lawsuit?
Well, the core claim, according to the complaint, sounds straightforward on the surface. Direct and secondary copyright infringement under the Copyright Act.
Okay.
The plaintiffs basically allege that Midjourney service acts like a, quote, virtual vending machine, generating unauthorized copies of their works. But the way they break this down involves some really interesting points about the tech, about how Midjourney actually works.
Okay, let's dig into that first major line of attack then. It gets right into the data side of things, which is super familiar to AI engineers listening. Their main assertion is that Midjourney copied their copyrighted works.
Right.
Specifically to train and develop its image service.
Yeah.
And crucially, without authorization.
This is really where they lay out the argument that the foundational act, the training itself, involved illegal copying. And they cite several pieces of evidence, or maybe reasoning, for this belief within the complaint.
Like what?
First, and maybe the most compelling for them, is just Midjourney's ability to consistently reproduce plaintiffs' characters.
Wow.
Their argument is basically you wouldn't get such accurate results for, say, Darth Vader or, the Minions, unless the model had seen and learned from a lot of images of those specific characters during training.
Right. It's that sort of, if it looks like a duck test, but for AI outputs, if the model can reliably spit out an image that looks just like Mickey Mouse or whoever,
exactly,
then the plaintiffs argue the data must have contained those characters.
Exactly. And they make a key legal argument here that has pretty significant technical implications. They claim that Midjourney's software model itself, like in its final trained state, it embodies copies of the works used in training, as that term is defined by the Copyright Act.
Now, hold on. For our technical listeners, this embodies copies claim. That's a really contested point, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we train a diffusion model, the output isn't like a stored JPEG of every image it saw.
Right, it's not.
It's this complex set of numerical parameters, model weights, right? Patterns the network learned. How do the plaintiffs argue that that constitutes embodying copies? And
that is the absolute crux of the legal challenge meeting the technical reality here. The plaintiffs are essentially arguing that even if it's not a direct pixel-for-pixel replica stored in the weights, the model's internal state is so influenced by the copyrighted works it saw during training that it effectively holds a copy of those works. And it's in a tangible medium, the model files themselves from which they can be reproduced.
So it's a legal interpretation pushing the definition of copy really hard into the realm of these learned statistical representations in a neural net.
Pretty much. They're viewing the model not just as a tool, but maybe as a derivative work itself, or like a database containing, legally significant aspects of the training data.
Okay, that clarifies the technical tension behind that legal claim. And the complaint even includes something that looks like direct evidence from Midjourney's founder. They quote David Holtz.
Yeah, they do. The complaint quotes David Holtz from interviews where he apparently admitted to scraping, quote, all the data it can, all the text it can, all the images it can from the internet.
Wow.
And crucially, he also explicitly stated he didn't seek copyright holders' consent because, well, he said there wasn't really a practical way to do it.
Okay.
The plaintiffs obviously used this as a kind of admission that, yes, unauthorized copying for training did happen, and on a massive scale.
Yeah. From the plaintiff's perspective, that quote fits their narrative perfectly. The complaint then goes on to detail this three-step process they allege Midjourney followed for the training, based on public statements and, typical AI training workflows.
Right, they break it down. Step 1, gathering. This is the big scrape. Using bots, web crawlers, whatever, just pulling in vast amounts of content from online sources.
Step 2, cleaning. Taking that raw data, filtering it, reformatting copies into formats suitable for training. And the plaintiffs argue that this process, this manipulation and reformatting itself, involves creating new copies of the original copyrighted stuff they gathered.
And then step 3, training. Using that clean data, they allege Midjourney fixed copies of plaintiffs' works in a tangible medium. That goes back to the claim about the model itself embodying copies.
Right.
From this model, they say the works can then be reproduced. And this whole process, start to finish, they argue, was done without authorization.
They also point to Midjourney's habit of releasing new versions, like V6. The complaint mentions Midjourney's CEO referring to version 6 as the third model trained from scratch.
Yeah, and that reinforces the plaintiff's allegation that this isn't just a one-off thing. The unauthorized copying for training, they argue, is an ongoing process repeated each time Midjourney builds a new version of its core model, retraining it on these huge data sets that likely include their works.
Okay, so argument 1. Unauthorized use of copyrighted material in the training data and the resulting model. But they don't stop there, right? The plaintiffs also argue Midjourney directly infringes through the outputs it generates for users.
Absolutely. This is the second main pillar of their claim. Even setting aside the training data issue for a moment, they allege Midjourney directly infringes copyright. How? By generating, distributing, and publicly displaying copies and derivative works of their characters whenever users submit prompts.
And the complaint includes a lot of examples, right? Screenshots of actual Midjourney output.
Oh yeah, lots of them. They show images generated from prompts asking for incredibly specific characters. Disney, Universal libraries. Think Darth Vader, Stormtroopers, R2-D2, and C-3PO.
Bart and Homer Simpson.
Bart and Homer, yeah. Marvel characters like Deadpool, Spider-Man, Hulk, Groot. Pixar characters like Sully, Elsa, Olaf. Classic Disney like Aladdin, Jasmine, Simba, Ariel.
And from Universal.
Same deal. Examples like the Minions, Toothless, and Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon, Shrek, Boss Baby, Po from Kung Fu Panda. The complaint often puts these generated images side by side with pictures of the original characters to really hammer home the alleged copying.
But here's a really interesting point, one that speaks to the complexity of these models and maybe why they're hard to control. The complaint highlights evidence from outside studies like one by Gary Marcus and Reed Salvin, showing Midjourney generates infringing images even when the prompt doesn't explicitly name the character.
Yeah, this is a crucial technical detail the plaintiffs are leveraging. It suggests the system isn't just like keyword matching character names.
Right.
The models have learned the visual characteristics of these specific characters so well during training that purely descriptive prompts can bring them up. So the complaint cites examples like prompts saying yellow 3D cartoon character with goggles and overalls.
And it makes minions.
And it generates minions. Or black armor with light sword resulting in Darth Vader.
Which implies that the learned internal representation of these characters inside the model is pretty robust. It's not just a name tag. It understands the visual concept.
Exactly. And the complaint uses Midjourney's own public explore page as more evidence of this whole thing.
How so?
Well, they argue this public page, where you see generated images and the prompts used, it serves multiple purposes for their infringement claims. One, it demonstrates the alleged direct infringement by just displaying outputs that copy their works.
Okay.
Two, it arguably encourages users to generate similar stuff by making these prompts and outputs public. And 3, the plaintiffs allege Midjourney curates this page, meaning they argue Midjourney knows it contains infringing content but uses it anyway to attract subscribers, so they're facilitating and benefiting from the infringement.
Okay, so we have the training data claim, the infringing output claim, and now they move to a slightly different angle, saying Midjourney could prevent this, but it has basically failed to do so.
Exactly. The plaintiffs argue Midjourney isn't just some uncontrollable black box here. They claim Midjourney does have technical measures, and could implement more, to prevent or at least reduce the infringement, but has actively chosen not to.
What's their proof for saying Midjourney has these control mechanisms?
They point straight to the fact that Midjourney already uses technical measures to block certain other kinds of content, based on prompts and their community guidelines.
Like what?
Well, they mention Midjourney's filters for things like violence, nudity, hate speech. The argument is pretty straightforward. If you can build filters for those categories, why can't you filter for copyrighted characters or styles?
Makes sense.
They also reference Midjourney's own terms of service, which apparently state the company can block inputs and terminate users for infringement. This suggests, plaintiffs argue, that they have both the technical and the administrative ability to act.
So the claim is, Midjourney has the tools, they have the stated right in their own 2S to control inputs and outputs, but they've specifically decided not to apply those controls when it comes to copyright.
That's the core allegation here, yeah. They claim Midjourney has, quote, affirmatively chosen not to implement copyright protection measures. Measures that, they point out, some competitors do use.
Like what kind of measures?
Things like rejecting prompts that seem likely to generate infringing content, maybe based on keywords or other analysis, or potentially screening the image outputs before they get fully displayed or made public.
And the complaint details the run-up to the lawsuit too, focusing on those cease and desist letters. Disney sent one in November 2024, Universal in May 2025.
Right, and those letters apparently weren't vague. They specifically listed characters that the plaintiffs claimed were being infringed by the service at that time.
And what was Midjourney's response, according to the complaint?
Or lack thereof, maybe. The complaint says Midjourney acknowledged getting Disney's letter, but didn't really respond further, and allegedly gave no response at all to Universal's letter.
Ouch. And the plaintiffs claim that instead of fixing things, Midjourney doubled down.
Yeah, that's the language used. By releasing an updated service, V7, that, according to the plaintiffs, still infringes. And they also continue to make the earlier V6 version available, which also allegedly infringes.
And this lack of response, the continued alleged infringement after being warned, that's probably used to argue willfulness, right? Which could mean bigger damages.
Absolutely. It supports claims of willfulness and deliberate disregard for copyright. And they also look ahead, expressing concern about what's next.
They mentioned Midjourney's upcoming video service, based on public announcements, I guess.
Exactly. The plaintiffs state their concern and their belief that Midjourney is probably training this new video service on their copyrighted works as well, and plans to launch it soon. They see this as just an expansion of Midjourney's alleged ability to distribute infringing content moving from still images into video.
Okay, so we have the argument about unauthorized training data, the argument about directly generating infringing outputs, and the argument that Midjourney could stop this but deliberately refused. What kind of harm are Disney and Universal claiming they've actually suffered because of all this?
The complaint lists several types. Substantial and irreparable injury is the broad claim. But more specifically, they argue Midjourney is usurping their control over their exclusive rights as copyright holders. Meaning the right to reproduce, distribute, publicly display, create derivative works. Basically, the ability to decide who gets to use their characters, how they use them, and crucially, whether they have to pay for a license to do so.
So it really comes down to control and the commercial side of things. They argue Midjourney is illegally and unfairly competing with companies that do pay for licenses and play by the rules.
Precisely. By allegedly skipping the licensing step, Midjourney avoids the costs and restrictions that legitimate licensees have to deal with. And they also claim it adds to consumer confusion. You know, users might see these really high-quality outputs that look just like famous characters on the Midjourney Explore page, or generate them themselves. And they might mistakenly believe that Midjourney's use of these characters, or maybe even their massive data scraping for training, is somehow authorized or endorsed by Disney or Universal, when the plaintiffs argue it absolutely is not.
What about that claim for secondary infringement? You mentioned that earlier as an alternative.
Right, yeah, this is a kind of backup legal theory. If Midjourney tries to argue, hey, it's the users typing the prompts who are the direct infringers, not us, then the plaintiffs claim Midjourney is still liable for secondary infringement, both vicarious and contributory infringement.
Okay, let's break that down quickly, especially how it relates to how the service works. Vicarious liability is alleged because
the plaintiffs argue Midjourney has both the right and ability to control the infringing activity, remember? They argue Midjourney could filter prompts and outputs, and they derive a direct financial benefit from it.
The control part ties back to their earlier point about existing filters. The financial benefit part seems pretty clear too, right? Midjourney's a paid subscription service.
Exactly. Millions of subscribers, reportedly huge revenue growth. The plaintiffs allege that the service's popularity and its whole business model are directly tied to its ability to generate these impressive images, including images that look a lot like their very popular copyrighted characters. That's the direct financial benefit link.
Okay, and then contributory liability.
That's alleged because the plaintiffs claim Midjourney knowingly and materially contributes to the infringement. The knowingly part comes from, 1, the cease and desist letters, explicitly telling them about specific characters being copied.
Right, the notice.
And 2, the public display of allegedly infringing outputs on its own Explore page.
Right.
They argue Midjourney knows this is happening. And despite this knowledge, they fail to take reasonable steps to stop it, and instead actively facilitate it by providing the service and even showcasing infringing examples.
So bringing all these claims together, the unauthorized training, the infringing outputs, the failure to prevent, the secondary liability stuff.
Yeah.
What are the plaintiffs actually asking the court to do about it? What's the end game here?
They're asking for some significant remedies. Money, for one. Damages, including potentially those hefty statutory damages up to $150,000 per infringed work if Midjourney's actions are found to be willful.
Wow.
They also want Midjourney to have to give up any profits it made from the alleged infringement, plus have Midjourney pay for their lawyers' fees and court costs.
Okay, but maybe the most impactful request, especially thinking about the future of AI development, is that request for injunctive relief, right? Preliminary and permanent.
Absolutely, that's huge. This means they want the court to issue orders that don't just award money after the fact, but actively stop Midjourney from infringing going forward. By prohibiting the copying, display, and distribution of their works, and this is the really critical part, prohibiting Midjourney from offering its image service and its upcoming video service unless they implement appropriate copyright protection measures to prevent this kind of infringement.
That requested injunction.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a really big deal because it points towards a potential future where courts might legally require AI developers to build specific technical safeguards into their models or services.
Exactly.
To actively avoid generating copyrighted material. It moves way beyond just paying damages later and asks for preventative technical requirements to be baked in.
So yeah, stepping back, this case really represents a major legal challenge from these huge traditional content owners against a leading generative AI company. The complaint hits Midjourney on multiple fronts. The alleged unauthorized use of copyrighted stuff in the training data itself, making that pretty bold claim that the model embodies copies. The direct generation of outputs that look like their characters, and the argument that Midjourney absolutely has the technical ability to prevent this, but has just refused to act, even after being put on notice.
And for you, listening, especially if you're working in AI and ML, this case is incredibly relevant, right?
Yeah.
It touches on these fundamental legal questions. What even is a copy when we talk about AI training data and the learned representations inside a model?
Right.
What's the responsibility of AI developers for the outputs their models produce, especially when they look so much like existing copyrighted works? And it really highlights the potential for legal pressure to force the issue of technical safeguards and content moderation inside generative models to deal with copyright head-on.
Definitely. The outcome here, whatever it is, could significantly shape the legal landscape for how AI systems that process and generate content based on existing works are built, trained, and deployed down the road. It forces developers, researchers, forces us to think about the legal side, not just after a model is out there, but right from the fundamental stages: data selection, training methods, output controls.
It really does make you wonder about the path forward, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As AI capabilities keep getting better, especially moving towards more complex stuff like video, animation, 3D generation things, Midjourney and others are clearly working on, as the complaint points out. How are creators and AI developers going to navigate this? How do you balance the incredible, transformative potential of these tools for making new things with the established rights of copyright holders?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. And maybe more technically for our listeners, what are the technical mechanisms that could genuinely satisfy both the legal needs and the creative possibilities here? What could actually work for everyone involved? Something to chew on.